In this episode of Hawthorne Valley's Roots to Renewal podcast, we are honored to welcome Dr. Bayo Akomolafe, posthumanist thinker, poet, teacher, essayist, and author. Together, he and our host, Martin Ping, share a thought-provoking conversation exploring a rich tapestry of ideas, beginning with Bayo's inspiring fellowship at the Schumacher Center for New Economics. The conversation delves into the concept of drifting and its relevance in our current times, the value of embracing uncertainty, grieving as a form of politics, and so much more. It's a deep and reflective dialogue you won't want to miss, so let's get right to it.
Good afternoon, Bayo. It is nice to see you and a real pleasure to have an opportunity to have a conversation.
Always wonderful, brother. Always wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for making the time today.
Yeah.
So right out of the gate, I'd like to ask you about the fellowship that you're doing at the Schumacher Center for New Economics, because it's such a great opportunity to have you in our neighborhood for 5 or 6 months and to have time to just really hang out. How did this come about that you were tapped for this honor?
I like the word tapped. Well, it was some kind of conspiracy. I mean, I've been in conversation with Susan. I spoke here at the Schumacher Center at St. James, actually, but hosted by the Schumacher Center last year. I think I did a talk on post-activism. We met at dinner then for the first time face to face. And then this otherworldly intelligence just invaded our sociality, and conversation started to sprout, like what would it look like for my family to come here with me and to spend half a year or even a full year. We had to shorten it to half a year, but what would it look like for us to all come here and be here together and to engage this beautiful convivial ecologies?
Is this the first fellowship that's named after W.E.B. Du Bois?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, I requested that since it was very collaborative, it was more than just an invitation. It was actually a putting heads together to craft what this could mean. And I suggested that we name it after Du Bois. And after, maybe in a way of honoring his work and pushing it further to its outer limits to see what else it can do right now in these charged moments. Yeah.
Well named. And I was very interested in meeting Sarah Bowie at dinner. Andrea, I know for some time, and was really struck by the name of her organization, the Foundation or Center for Uncertainty, I think it is, or
yes,
which
the Council for Uncertain Human Futures, something.
Yeah, I love that. Seeing as uncertainty has been my operating system for most of my life.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Sarah's great. And Clark University, of course, they're the primary hosts of our dancing through these places.
You mentioned your talk back in the fall, which I came to on post-activism. And you also speak about a post-humanist world. And I think it'd be nice to elaborate a little bit on that, and to say what that means to you and give a little description.
Well, this past Sunday, I spoke about dark fungi. People who were there felt that was remarkable. Not that I'm a mycologist or something, or I know a lot about fungi, but it is intriguing to think, even just for a little while, about what swims around us. That there are all these alphabets between A and Z, is what I'm trying to say, Martin. That it's not just A and there's space between and there's Z, right? We don't live in a distantist world, you know, that is entirely cartographical or geometric or spaced out. The world is teeming with, I was going to say life, but even life would be an insult to what the world is doing. It's not life or non-life. It's just experimental becoming. And there's something about reading
The
that story about dark fungi that speaks to what scholars have been examining around posthumanism. And posthumanism is a decentering of humans in a nutshell, right? It's a way of saying that maybe our intelligences, maybe cognition, maybe how we make decisions, maybe how we frame culture and sociality, maybe how we do technology, maybe all of these things are not just tools. Maybe we don't live outside of the world. Maybe we live within the world. We are the world in its collaborative, orgasmic becoming. And that's what posthumanism is. It's a tense field, or rather, it's a field of tensions that wants to tell the story about humans in a different way.
Yeah, well, I love that picture that you're creating, and it's, we're maybe live in interesting times. The title of your talk, which I didn't realize was one of three curses when I first saw the title of the talk, and maybe you could say more about that in a minute. But one could say these are certainly interesting times that we're living in, and probably all times are from any perspective.
Yeah.
But it does feel like we're at the edge of something that for me looks like uncertainty, and the narrative needs to broaden and shift if it's going to be encompassing the expansiveness of our consciousness to live into these new times in a way that is actually something that I would say, in a nutshell, I would like to see possible for our children and grandchildren.
Mhm, mhm.
I think the current construct is not quite going to cut it, but I don't have the eloquence to say exactly what the new will be, other than it needs to encompass this view that you've expressed in the post-humanist idea.
Right. I mean, I don't think the new is eloquent, and I don't think it rides on the waves of eloquent elaboration. I think that the new is stuttering, and that the new is speaks with a lisp. That the new isn't this shiny, already composed, already predetermined thing, just, you know, a few feet away from us. It's not a matter of distance. The new is a matter of failure. The new is how we stray away from cartographic linearities and steady highways. The new is the sidewalk, so to speak, or the bushes beyond the highway. So, you know, I agree, brother, that we have come to some kind of limit, some limitation of our logics. And I'm acutely aware of course, the climate crisis of these times, and how we're telling stories about climate collapse and global warming. My wife, EJ, said it's really hot outside. Of course, being really hot isn't what climate or global warming is about. But heat domes and and the death of species and runaway weather patterns, of course, contribute to this ambience of crisis and this idea that we need to address it head on. I do take issue with the idea of thinking straight. So, we are often invited to think straight. We need to get the facts in a row, apply some, expertise and address the problem. I think thinking straight is exactly how this crisis emerges, right? I think one has to think voluptuously. One has to think adrift. One has to follow thought through its hidden career. One has to visit mountains and dig one's hand in soil and listen to the world in a different way that doesn't depend on a techno-bureaucratic solutionism. Where we are and where exactly we want to be already steadily portrayed on a magical blueprint. There's something repetitive and terrifying to me about that. If we know exactly where we want to go, then we might be repeating the same logics that have brought us to the place of trouble in the first place. This is the reason why my people say, in order to find your way, you must get lost. So how do we drift away? How is drifting a vocation of these times? How is drifting a form of thinking together? How is drifting a form of loss? How is grieving a politics of this time? Those are the questions I'd like to hold space for.
When you hold the space for questions like that, is one of the phenomenological outcomes that others who are holding that similar space are like you're sort of finding each other? Because it seems to me this is a moment for us to be doing this. And like I think you said on Saturday, it's not up to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So and it's interesting because it's very easy, and I certainly do it myself, to be caught in the kind of trap of urgency that things feel very urgent. There's whether it's social climate, political climate, the atmospheric climate, there is an urgency. So I'm a member of all these like slow money, slow living, slow city, like to go slow is one thing, and to drift is another thing. And to have the courage to do so, it feels to me like strength in numbers would really help here. So my question is, are you finding, are the other drifters self-organizing?
I think we're, in a sense, the drift cannot be reduced to the drifter, right? The drift is how we are, and by we, I don't just mean humans, but how bodies are being summoned into new kinds of logics that are not available or computable or measurable by the civilizational forms that we've assumed. I'll just give a very, very down-to-earth example. I was being interviewed, I believe, last year, and it was this very important platform, and I was speaking about my theory of white syncopation. I was speaking about drift and how these elements in the world are tugging at our sleeves, disrupting our performances of confidence and urging us to meet a sense of loss. It's like we've come to the edge. We've come to the edge of how we operate, of how we think. And the world is dynamic at the ecotones of edges. Like this threshold is inviting a different kind of performance altogether. I was describing white syncopation, and I was waxing poetic about it. And in the middle of it, the interviewer, I noticed she was distressed for some reason, and she just started to cry. She started to cry so much that I actually stopped myself and said, "Sister, you can take all the time you need. Just, we will be here." And there was someone else with her, two interviewers. I think one was a professor. Anyway, I said, "Let's take all the time you need, and there's no rush. We'll be with you in this time." And she did. She took her time. She took some tissue and she blew her nose and she wiped herself and she tried to compose herself and get back into, interviewer posture. And I said, just before you get back into that posture, I just want to let you know that what I was talking about earlier, that's exactly what you just performed. That's exactly what you just met. That this crying in the middle of a formal interview, which is a no-no for something professional and expert. This crying in the middle of it, this transgressing of the ethics of an interview is exactly what the world is secreting today. We're all being called out of the logics of that steady performance and in ways that we cannot even explain. And I said, that is syncopation. You know, I didn't tell her to explain why she was crying or anything. We just stayed with the unwieldiness of that experience in the middle of an interview. I think the same is happening in the world at large. We are losing our composure, where the logics of proper composure are hollowing out. And I think there's something emancipatory about that. So the drift is happening and it's enlisting us into how it's mattering. And that's very intriguing.
A challenge that comes up for me as you say that is that in this liminal time of, sort of in between or at the edge and the not knowing and the uncertainty of what's at the other side of that, the breakdown of the logic and that's somewhere inner sensing that that's occurring, is it possible that that's producing a lot of the anxiety and mental angst that is, I look around and I sometimes think, wow, people seem like we're really going crazy here. Some of the things that feel so out of whack to me in such a short amount of time. And I just wonder if that's part of it.
I believe so. In fact, look, I just had a conversation before joining this one, and the interviewer, just a while ago, quoted someone who spoke about, and I cannot remember this person's name, but spoke about how the movements of this moment will be terrifying, and they might wreak some kind of havoc, that kind of engineers us into the posture of pathologizing it. We will often name the new as a problem, right? We'll name it a problem. We will give it a name. We will put it in our archive of diseases. But that idea that the new shows up often as pathology, as dis-ease, as a kind of discomfort that is not easily named or easily designated, that remains intriguing to me. So see, Martin, I think that, I've been using the language of a mass disabling event. Like there's this mass disabling event that is corrupting our purity, right? If you think about civilization as a purification of our wildness, there's a mass disabling event, some kind of exposure, and all the red alerts are going off, right? I spoke recently about how the disruption of binaries and sexual orientation is an indication of that kind of syncopation, right? But as bodies become different and sensuous and explore and experiment, there is also a politics that seeks to re-engineer composure. And I think in some, to some degree, the political left, in its engineering of recognizability might be complicit in making, in bringing bodies back to a kind of steady logic, if you understand what I mean. It's like the only way to be recognized is if you proliferate pronouns. I've written and talked about pronouns, for instance, but that if you don't insist, and it's not even the pronouns themselves, it's the energy behind their usage. If you don't get it right the first time, then you're part of harm. That ethic is caught up in so much troubling civilizational patterns, right? So I do think that the world is proliferating diversionary and fugitive kinds of identities and frameworks and possibilities, but that our politics is to attempt to heal that, is to come and sit here. We will give you respectability. We'll give you a suit and a tie. We'll give you representation. We'll give you visibility. And there's something troubling about that.
I was given a book by a dear friend called the overview, Meditations on a World in Transition, written by a person named Willow Defabao. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly.
Yes, yes.
And she's trans. She's a trans person, and she
I met
writes.
her recently.
Oh, I was
She's
so moved by this
she's a
book.
dear sister. Love her so.
Oh,
Yes, yes,
I hope I get to meet her one day.
yes,
I know her partner in this magazine, Atmos,
yes,
Jake Sargent, but I haven't not met her. But I did read the entire book, every essay, and the introduction, and I was really struck. And I think you said it in just a little while ago, that there's something important, really important, to in these voices of people who are kind of living a transition themselves, that are in some way microcosmically embodying the larger transition of this disruptive time that we're in. And I don't think I ever heard it so loud and clear as I did in the way that she wrote this introduction. And it was in no way like militant, in your face kind of writing. It was
yeah,
just this
yeah,
beautiful invitation to expand my own limited understanding, to just say, wow, there's something really, I need to listen to this voice.
yes, yes. Willow is one of the most profound speakers and thinkers that I've ever met. And Jake Sargent, they're friends. Jake and Ryan of Atmos magazine. I was keynote at their event recently. And so yes, Willow's book speaks eloquently and beautifully to this idea of disruption and transition and multi-ecology springing from the cracks, and how that isn't, she doesn't write like you so revealingly said. She doesn't write with a militant morality. Like, if you don't get it right, there's something wrong with you, or something like that. She's speaking to something that doesn't lend itself to that militancy, to that politics. In other words, she's speaking to a different politics, what I would call a para politics. And that is not available for the kind of politics we have today, which is engineered around representation, which is linear. And again, representation matters. But if that's all we have, we're in trouble.
I would just make a comment that I find one of the things most refreshing in coming to your talks and your writings, and that you also have the same ability to be speaking about rather challenging themes that could become polarizing, but you do it in a very non-binary way. And I have never heard you talk like down or negative about any other being, and yet without skirting or like trying to avoid difficult issues or topics. You I think you do so in such a gracious and inviting way that I just find refreshing. Thinking of something I read in one of your writings around the idea that like the current construct is all set up around victory and defeat. And it would seem to me, I'd be curious to know, like, when did it come to you, or how did it come to you, that it's not, in spite of all the urgencies and everything, it's like our task is not calling us to
When?
be wedded to victory and defeat. Like, how did, where in your journey did that really become available to you, or has it always been?
I have, I really don't know how to answer that question. Everything I say to that in response to that would be a lie, and it's okay. To be a form of fabulation, it would be making up a story to meet the imperatives of the question. I don't know. I could refer to my readings, my cultural training, an intuitive sense of the processual, that is a world that is never finished. I'm very, very much, you know, frightened by prospects of a heaven, right? Heaven,
Yeah.
you know, a stable destination that is finished and complete. There's something utterly terrifying to me. It's not even the notion of a hell. It's the idea of that you're dead and then you float up and you meet an angel and the angel says, well, here's your room. And it's not and it's not like here's your room for the weekend. It's like here's a room for all time. This is it. This is what you've been working towards. This room here, it's gold. You notice golden toilets, golden everything, right? That idea of being finished and arriving is terrifying to me. So I guess something about the intelligence of that fear, I don't know where it comes from. It's alien and familiar all at once. Just instructs me in the ways that allow me to notice that even victory could become a trap, right? And there are historical accounts that and lessons, you know. I spoke about on Saturday the African independence movements and how those movements from the late 19th century to the 70s, the 1970s, those movements were attempts to chase away colonizers. And it gave birth to brand new African states that aspired to reach the very height of nation statehood. But in defeating our colonizers in a sense, in chasing them away, in achieving victory, in achieving independence, we found out that we were caught up in a trap. We were stuck in a sense. We had to turn around and deal with flags and anthems and the International Monetary Fund and debt and so much more that we couldn't have anticipated when we fought to gain independence. So I'm thinking about the non-legible futures, Martin, the spaces we don't know yet. I think about victory as part of a perceptual stronghold, something carceral, like a prison cell, like gaining access in a prison cell still renders you in the prison cell. I'm looking for a way out of that carceral dynamic. And that is that is why I interrogate and seek to disrupt our notions of success and victory and arrival and independence and in emancipation and very specifically justice. You know, justice for me is the legibility of the public order, right? Justice is how the public gains its legibility, its intelligibility. Think about the immigration process. This is not, popularly talked about, but the scholars and the literature have some insights around this, that when migrants come to the United States, for instance, there are a series of rituals and processes to render their bodies and, their journeys and their stories legible to the American public, right? It's not just to the American public. Migrancy anywhere in the world is a coming to a threshold. I mean, I'm a Nigerian. I travel with my Nigerian passport. And every time I come to the border, I am marked and I have these questions that are thrown at me about my work, my person, my expertise. What do you do? Tell us why you're here. Or could you step this way, sir? Secondary screening. And then the interrogation goes even deeper. These are not, wishy-washy things. There are material, consequential rituals of marking bodies and rendering them legible, right? Even the very seemingly insignificant act of doing that thing, what's that X-ray thing that you go through? Of standing in a different of posture is ableist already, right? There's something about that suggests be legible in this way. And then if you pass the Rubicon, if you cross over the threshold, then you're accepted, right? So I think there's something about being accepted, being marked, and being rendered legible that is increasingly troubling. And so I'm looking for the non-legible, the places where we don't add up, the places where we spill away from the lines that have been already predetermined, and what that offers us as a species.
I love that. Well, you in that you bring up a question around another ideal and another important term, and that is freedom.
Right.
And there was quite a discussion on Saturday at,
Mhm.
at your talk around freedom
Mhm.
and are we free, or can we ever be free? And
Yeah.
I'd love to go into that a little bit with you,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
will,
Yeah.
because if I heard it correct on Saturday, you were leaning to saying that we're not actually free. I'm gonna say all this, and you can correct everything that I get
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
That
Of course.
that we're not free as individuals because it's really our interdependence would would kind of steer us otherwise. And and my question, I mean, I firmly believe in our interdependence, and actually have had festivals here that I call our Declaration of Interdependence around the 4th of July
Mhm.
rather than independence, because I think that that's a big fallacy that is, I call it the John Wayne syndrome. I don't know if John Wayne
It,
means anything to you, but
it does, absolutely. I have lots of John Wayne stories about.
but my question really centers around what, for lack of a better word, what I would call inner freedom. Is there any allowance for our inner freedom within the entanglements of an interdependent reality?
It depends on what you mean by inner freedom, brother. I find it excruciatingly difficult to parse between the inner and the outer. It's not just because of my vocation as a psychologist or a posthumanist thinker. Well, it's largely because of that. Is that I don't know how to think ecology and psychology apart. I don't know how to. They're not two separate things for me. It's that in the same stream that moves from fungal secretions to other kinds of mycorrhizal and rhizomatic possibilities, that same stream bleeds and yields and merges into the gilded interiority of ourselves, how we think, how we feel, how we understand the world. These are not to be demarcated or separated from the world outside. And that's what I might mean by freedom. I mean it in the Henry Bergson sense that declarations of freedom and independence, so called, are the creativity of a morality of the steady individual, right? They are attempts at thinking about the individual self, right? The individual as a majestic, transcendent arrival point, right? That there's nothing else. That if we think about agency and responsibility and cognition and decision making and choice, we kind of reduce it to the individual that acts upon the world. And that's a very, very American enterprise. It's not, it's a very Euro-American enterprise. The individual that acts upon the world, that solves problems. What that obscures is the world that acts upon the individual, right? It obscures and it erases out of view how the world forms us and formulates us and shapeshifts us in return. There's this American saying about guns don't kill people. It's people that kill people, or something like that. And there's this other argument around guns, I think related, that the guns are tools, right? They're just mere tools. And having them is, wherever you land on either side of that conversation, the idea that guns are just tools or tools are just tools is a deeply humanist story, and it is inadequate to tell and hold the weight of what is happening or how our bodies are still being made. We are not as fully put together as we think we are. just like music cannot be reduced to its bits, right? You cannot take a note and decipher the music from the single note. The music is more than just a coagulation of notes. There's something about the changeability of the note that means the note is not still or individual. This is Henry Bergson's example. It's not even mine. It's brilliant, but it's the idea
Yeah.
that music is not just a summation of notes. In the same way, freedom is not to be designated to the note itself. Freedom is the assemblage. It's how changeable, emergent, emancipatory, how we move and how movement moves us. So we don't have freedom per se. It's a very capitalist framework, to think through or to think within when we say that we have freedom. I think instead that we are free to the extent that we are able to fail or to move or to become something else that we don't even know yet.
Your came up for me as this David White poem. The
I know
poet.
David one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is his. We shape ourselves to fit the world, and by the world are shaped again. The visible and the invisible
Yes.
working together in common purpose to
Yeah.
produce the miraculous, something along those lines. But it's the act itself that is interesting. I think I would say the same for the idea of morality, that it's another one of these things we have. Do we have, are you a moral being, or we have morality? That can only, it seems to me anyway, could be determined in the moment and in the act, because we can explain away and rationalize it away one way or the other till the cows come home. But the fact is, we don't really know. It's not something we have.
No, no, no. I spoke about morality on Saturday as well. That's not something we have. Morality is a holding pattern, right? It's I've often distinguished between ethics and morality by saying ethics has no viscosity. Morality, morality, however, is viscosity. It's how bodies are rendered available to logics and systems of belonging and identitarian patterns. I was speaking about this in Italy once, and I remember a dancer. She's Nigerian Italian. She got up and she started to dance out what I was saying. And she said, I mean, she didn't say, she said with her body, she said, morality is this. No, she said ethics is this. And she was doing something fluid-like with her limbs. She was just moving, and then she froze. And she said, this is morality. That morality is just frozenness. It's a state of captivity, right? I'm not saying that we don't need morality, therefore. We do. Every form of settlement, every form of naming, every form of ritualizing, every form of christening the world in one way or the other needs morality. But morality will often get exhausted, right? Our notions of what is good and what is bad and what obtains and what it doesn't obtain and what is beautiful and what isn't will often need to change, right? Where we plant a home will often desert itself. I've said it in my book that if we don't leave home soon enough, home will leave us, right? There's a sense in which morality migrates as well. It's the migrancy of morality that I call ethics. It's the fluidity of a world that is never finished. Yes.
Boy, that is something to sit with, like a little gift there. The other quote that has come up with me all through this conversation is just like Rilke's quote on living the question, that we should really live the question, that we don't. And I'm so comfortable with that. I like questions so much better than answers. I've been always suspicious of answers, especially when they're quick and right off the shelf. Then I don't know. It just doesn't seem it can be that ready. And I think it probably gravitates around my conscious or unconscious comfort with this idea of a world in continual progress, that we're just part of human becoming rather than human being. So thank you for making that so available and present to my conscious thinking, because I do like to sit with this. So in the few minutes that we have left, I would be remiss not to ask you about, and I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Vunja, the carnival that is
Yes.
coming up in August,
Yes. Yes.
which I'm signed up for.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Thank you. And I thank all the forces making this carnival happen. As I said on Saturday, carnival is the vocation of not thinking straight. It's like when thinking straight meets its algorithmic limitations, when justice doesn't seem like it serves. Many examples I can offer to show how justice is not some idealized arrival rendezvous point. It is a practice. It's institutional. It is colonial too. But when it meets its own limitations, then we need to think through absurd times absurdly. We need to dance with the monster instead of trying to rid ourselves of the monstrous. And the carnival is this site of holding the excess, not successfully, but just meeting and encountering the excessiveness that spills beyond the logics of our time. It's not a solutionistic enterprise. It's not a party. It's not just having a good time. It's not having a good time centrally at all. It is meeting excess. And so Vunja happens, it's a seed carnival. We call it a seed carnival because we're planting it as a seed and we hope it germinates and sprouts into a forest of carnivals around the world. And it happens August 6th to 8th. It's a few weeks from now. And I'm very excited about it. Maybe one more thing to say is that I grew up thinking that the miraculous was something that happened once in a while. I grew up Christian, you see. And the model of the miraculous that was recommended to me was that the world was ordinary and the miraculous was the tinkering of some divine, interrupter from outside of the ordinary, tinkering with how things should work. But I'm now understanding that the miraculous is the paradigm, that we live in a world that is miraculous and that our perceptual frameworks are what we rudely call the ordinary. And maybe the task of today is to become fugitive, is to break away from those strangleholds so we can sense the world differently. That's it.
That is great place to take a pause. I love living in a miraculous world. Thank you. I love that I'm living in a miraculous world with you. And I'm looking forward to being together in August and certainly before. That I really, from every corner of my heart, thank you for the time today and for being so open and gracious. And it's really been special time for me. So
thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Bayo.
Learn more about Bayo's work and explore his writings and offerings at his website, bayoakomolafe.net. To get tickets for the carnival, Vunja, a gathering of the seeds with Bayo Akomolafe and friends at the Schumacher Center in Great Barrington on August 6th through 8th, visit centerforneweconomics.org/events. Thank you for tuning in to Hawthorne Valley's Roots to Renewal podcast. Our interconnected initiatives work together to fulfill our association's mission of renewing soil, society, and self. To explore more about our efforts, visit us at hawthornevalley.org. As a registered 501c3 nonprofit, Hawthorne Valley thrives on the generosity of supporters like you. Please consider making a donation to help us continue our work. Additionally, you can support us by sharing this podcast with your friends and leaving a rating and review. A special thanks to Grammy Award-winning artist Aaron Dessner for our beautiful soundtrack, and to Aaron Ping for his exceptional editing skills.